Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by Mr. Tucker Hazel. We are back today to talk about the recent Nintendo Direct once again, because I think a lot of you out there in the world are going kind of crazy mode right now.
Yep.
And
Up is down, left is right, cats and
whoa,
dogs living in the street, Abram and Tucker agreeing. What's going on?
what the hell?
What the hell?
So we're here to talk about our view, and I think our shared thesis that actually Nintendo and Nintendo Switch 2 are in a very strong position through the holiday and into 2026, which is very much contrary to the overwhelming majority of discussion around this direct over the last day, I would say.
Yes. That's the goal that we're going to try to convince you of.
Yes.
But I think the thesis, the hook, frankly, what I'm probably going to put in, thumbnails and titles and stuff is that you're wrong about Nintendo Switch 2. And a lot of the complaints, yes, you, audience member, and a lot of the complaints.
Wait, look behind you! Holy fuck! No, not you. I'm talking about them.
Oh, sorry. I get easily disturbed. A lot of the complaints that people have against what yesterday's Direct showed, what the Switch 2 lineup has, are not, frankly, actually based in the development realities of Nintendo's games. And I think that it is, at worst, foolish, and at best, ill-informed to make these claims that people were expecting certain games that I think were just never realistic to begin with. And hopefully through this video, with as much information and respect as I can muster, I can educate the people who may not be as familiar with development timelines and Nintendo's team structures to understand why it's not Nintendo's fault that you're disappointed there wasn't a 3D Mario. It's not Nintendo's fault you're disappointed there wasn't a Smash Brothers. It was never going to happen. And so it's your fault.
I think one thing that I really want to hammer on in this discussion is that I think that there is a impulse in the Nintendo community to conflate what is good for Nintendo with what is good for you, the player. And I think that when you blur that line, you kind of don't really give an honest appraisal of either where you sit as a player or where Nintendo sits as the company. Because I think one of the things we're going to get into is that a lot of the discussion that we've been seeing online is around the idea that Nintendo doesn't have consequential games on its slate that are going to sell systems. Now, I would make a two-prong retort to you. One, they do. Two, that's not your problem.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing wrong with involving yourself in these more sort of analytical, business-minded, strategy-minded conversations, because we both do it a lot. We both really enjoy that. But I think it's important when you're doing that to really dig into the figures, dig into development timelines, dig into potential sales based on history, and use that to inform what you think Nintendo is doing and whether you think it's right or wrong. Because you have to do that to be honest in this conversation, I think. Otherwise, I think the way you can go, which in my view is more than fair, is to ground your thoughts in your perspective and say, hey, I really want that big 3D Mario, or I'm really waiting for that next Zelda title. But you can't conflate these things. You can't. And so I think what we're going to try to do here is both make, in my view, the creative case where I think this is a really great lineup that I think as a player you should be involving yourself in a little bit more closely. Maybe find a new favorite game. Obviously, we've not played these games based on our understanding of these series, but then also make sort of divorce from ourselves this more business-minded case to rebut, what I think is a lot of sort of misunderstanding of how Nintendo's next 15 months look.
Yeah. Where do you want to start with breaking this down? Is there an element of the Direct? Is there an element of response that you've heard people have that you think is what engages you most in this conversation?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm most intrigued by is this idea that Nintendo doesn't have games upcoming that are going to sell Switch 2 hardware units.
Yeah.
And the first point I'll make, which is a common point, but should be more common, is that this holiday season, the games that are going to most strongly sell the hardware are in the rearview mirror, pun intended, because the answer is Mario Kart World.
Correct. Yeah, definitely.
So I want to start there. But I would also make the argument that upcoming, there's a lot of stuff with a lot of potential to involve more players in the Switch 2 ecosystem.
Yeah, I think Mario Kart World is a difficult one for the Nintendo community at its current moment to reconcile with. The role that it plays in Nintendo's the way that Nintendo is viewing the launch era of the Switch 2, because the game came out, had great reviews, sold incredibly well, continues to sell incredibly well, and has pushed as a launch title the Switch 2 to being the fastest selling video game console of all time. That is,
yeah.
I think even Nintendo or Mario Kart World's biggest detractors have to admit, okay, that is the case. That's how it has happened. But what that means is that because this launch period has been very heavily saturated with the hardcore fans picking up the system, which makes a lot of sense. It's usually how it goes. Is that then the argument evolved to, well, because hardcore Mario Kart players who burned through hundreds of hours of this game in a week and a half or whatever are disappointed with certain elements of the game's design, which I'm not saying that's not fair, but because they are in the moment disappointed with these certain elements, even though, again, the game is selling well and is a large part very well reviewed, that means that it is a lesser title. That it means that people on a broader scale won't be as interested in it. I haven't heard that claim specifically, but I do think it's implied by people saying, oh, well, it's just an intermission Mario Kart. It's not, when in reality, most people who will play that game, who will buy that game, will love it and not necessarily recognize the issues that the hardcore fans have. Again, it's fine if you feel that way.
Yeah.
And also, they aren't aware that this is complaints that's happening. They see the new open world Mario Kart being bundled in with the system for $50, and they're like, well, that's a great deal. The game looks great, and I'm going to play it for a decade.
Yeah, I think, again, this is what you're illustrating, I think, is so key, because it's illustrating the difference between what is the business case for this game.
Yep.
And then what is the hardcore reception of it, the hardcore perspective.
Yeah.
Anecdotally speaking, the game that has moved people in my life who are very casual gamers is strictly Mario Kart. That's what the casual people that come over to visit want to play when I'm playing my Switch 2 and someone's over there asking if I'm playing Mario Kart.
Yeah.
That's a game with a lot of potent appeal to people who are going to get that for Christmas. Open it up, do a couple of Grand Prix, put it down, come back, do the same, and rotate through that process.
Yeah. Maybe dig around the open world a little bit, think it's cool, but not engage super deeply in it to the point where they have to do all of the P-switches and realize they're not on the map. A lot of the design elements that are complained about actually are not impactful to, or maybe even really noticeable to the wide audience that Mario Kart is intended to appeal to.
Yeah, and I think that what you're also getting at is that the game, in reality, as it's going to relate to the holiday season, is unburdened by these issues that people are raising. And
correct. And even to the point where people are like, well, why is there not DLC already? Well, most people don't have the game yet. So that's why it's not that important that they get DLC 2 months after the game comes out, because the majority of the people who will play and buy Mario Kart World in the year of our Lord 2025 do not own the game yet. They haven't experienced any of it. They don't need an extra cup. They have all this cup that they haven't played yet.
This is a very sharp point, actually. And because what it makes me wonder, and I think this was such a good thing, I actually hadn't even considered this, but you imagine that the adoption rate for Switch 2 on the bar graph is going to go basically vertical when the holiday season hits, right?
Absolutely.
and then you give people a wider group of people time to play that game for a couple months, and then maybe in a direct in the first quarter of 2026, Nintendo has a booster course pass equivalent tied to a Nintendo Switch membership again, and then you're involving all these new people in this online subscription.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that this is the approach I want, but I'm saying that the conversation that you all are engaging us in necessitates these kinds of points.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing I want to make by the same token here, Tucker.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that Nintendo front-loaded what is likely going to be their biggest game of the generation.
Yeah.
At launch has opened the door for a lot of smaller, more interesting titles to sort of follow. And I think speak more directly to the hardcore gamer. I think that there's this
that's very interesting.
There's this weird sensibility right now that like Nintendo is not delivering their S tier stuff, and that's like an issue for everybody. I think that's an issue for nobody. Because the casual player is going to pick up the system with most likely Mario Kart come Christmas, and then we get to enjoy things like Kirby Air Riders or enjoy things like Prime 4.
Yeah.
And then this is where you can say as the viewer, well, I don't want to play those games. And that's fair, but that's grounding it in your perspective. That has nothing to do with Nintendo's business case for the holiday, which is, in my view, airtight, especially with Pokemon and now Hyrule Warriors.
Yeah, the point of the double hitter of Mario Kart and Pokemon is fascinating one, because that's how Nintendo views the strength of their holiday season. I think that's how most people will view the strength of their holiday season, and I think it will more than likely pan out that this is an incredibly strong sales-wise and presumably reception-wise, though, ZA doesn't have reviews yet, for Nintendo. I think it'll just be pretty much good all around. Is that, yes, the hardcore group might view Mario Kart World as something a little bit lesser than it is in reality. And we've refuted that point. But I also think that Nintendo, the difference between the way Nintendo views Pokemon Legends ZA and the way the hardcore community views Pokemon Legends ZA are very, very different. In that, I'm actually very surprised that of how hard Nintendo has leaned into since the Switch 2 Direct, where it was revealed that Legends ZA a day and date would be getting a Switch 2 version. How hard they've leaned into this is a Nintendo Switch 2 game. Have they, since that reveal, have they shown Switch 1 footage? I don't think so. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
We played it on Switch 2 demo units at PAX.
That's true. Yeah, it was big Switch 2, and it was Pokemon Legends and Kirby, and then around that you've got your Metroid and Mario and stuff like that. They're treating this as a Switch 2 game that is incidentally also on Switch 1. Now, that's not the development reality of that game, but on promotion level, that's how Nintendo views it, and I think that's potentially how it will play out in the holiday season. It'll be interesting to see if we get any breakdown on the generational divide between those two, between the two systems. And the main point to all this is that this is the game that Nintendo is bundling with their system this holiday season.
Yes.
The Pokemon Legends ZA Nintendo Switch 2 bundle is the holiday bundle for Nintendo Switch 2. And it's got big Pokemon on the new console's box.
So this is where we're going to get into things that are less sexy, but I think important.
Yeah.
The price of the Switch in many territories around the world, including now in North America, so the Switch 1 has been raised.
Yeah.
There is, I think it's $400 right now for a
for a base Switch,
for an OLED Switch.
For an OLED, you're right. Yeah.
The difference in cost, you're going to be looking at $100 between that bundle and an OLED Switch. Only one of them has the game included, and I think it'd be very silly to imagine that just because the game is cross-buy, people are going to be compelled spiritually to buy a Switch 1 and ZA separately for $460, then buy the $500 Switch 2 bundle with the game.
Yeah.
Nintendo has created a pricing environment right now where the Switch 1 is not a great value proposition anymore. Yeah. That's partially that is a function of tariffs, but they made the shrewd decision to put the tariffs and to offset that on the older units to make the value proposition of the newer system look better. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying it's not impossible that people are going to receive a Switch Lite and Pokemon Legends ZA for Christmas this year, but I think that the assumption in Nintendo's mind, which is a fair one, is that what's going to be under the tree in holiday 2025 is going to be the new Nintendo system and the new Pokemon game, not the old Nintendo system and the new Pokemon game.
And again, because that is what's being marketed, the association is that Pokemon and Switch 2 are one and the same. And when a child is seeing Cartoon Network advertisements and billboards, and they're talking about with their friends, they certainly might be talking about the game in terms of it also being on Switch if they're informed enough for that. But they're going to ask for the new Nintendo. This is a tale as old as time.
And so again, this is the sort of thing that is just the reality of how Nintendo's business is being operated right now. If you want to think about the player's perspective, I think there is a fair argument that the window of time after Donkey Kong Bonanza until Pokemon Legends ZA or Mario Galaxy, depending, but really ZA,
yeah.
is not particularly rich with content.
I would make that argument. It doesn't matter that much to me, but I don't really give a shit about anything between then.
Right. The point I'm making is that
because there's basically nothing between them.
Yeah, I mean, we got because of who we are and how hardcore we are into the world of Nintendo. We got some conversation, some time on a Dragon Drive. I'm really enjoying the new Donkey Kong DLC. Yeah, I've been playing last night this morning. Kirby is, I think it's sort of so. But my point is, I think that's a fair complaint to levy as an engaged hardcore player against Nintendo 2025. But this window of time is not relevant to Nintendo's fortunes in the broader calendar year. Yeah. And I think
because there are two sales moments.
Yes.
In the first year of this, specifically this.
The first 6 months.
Launched. You're right. Launch and then the holiday. Yeah. And they're kind of just like in the middle there. It's like, well, like, frankly, no one's going to be buying the system anyway compared to those two major spikes. And so it makes sense to focus your sales efforts on the time periods when people are more likely going to be buying the system.
Well, here's an interesting point, actually, because I think you're right in a broad perspective. But if you go to Circana data, Mr. Matt Piscatella, Nintendo sold over 2 million hardware units in July, actually pacing them 75% ahead of sales of Switch 1. Now, I think you can attribute that partially to people who are waiting for Donkey Kong, which is the other consequential new exclusive title of the year. But nonetheless,
people are vastly underplaying.
but nonetheless, I think that people are going to continue to be purchasing units in August, September.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, of course.
Regardless of whether the massive game is out, if they're just getting that, they're again being introduced to Mario Kart and Donkey Kong. Yeah, and I think you need to appreciate, especially if you look at how the Switch 1 generation unfolded, the way that Nintendo's games sold with long tails. And so actually a system seller in April of 2024 is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, if that makes sense. Like these games are always going to be relevant, and it always snowballs, right? So if you're talking about 2 months after release, you're still talking about people who are buying for Mario Kart and buying for Donkey Kong.
Yes, of course.
We're going to come back to Donkey Kong with your point about development, because that's very key, because obviously that's an EPD8 game, and EPD8 makes 3D Mario. But I'm curious for your take of this run of games here that we have. By the way, you made a great graphic. You should put this up on... Well, oh wait, I'm editing this. I should put this up on screen at some point. For Hyrule Warriors, Kirby Air Riders, and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Yeah.
Which are the other holiday games we haven't mentioned yet.
Across November to December. What do you make of those from any point of view?
Let's see. So the thing that I'm most fascinated by is the idea that this variety of games, I think all of which seem to be quality in whatever regard that is, but because people don't view them as speaking to the broader Nintendo fan base, which I think is 100% accurate and a good analysis to make, that this combination of these three games don't matter to Nintendo Switch 2, I think is a very poor judgment call. Because where I see, or where some people might see where we both see, me and other people, see 3 games that will probably tap out each around the 5 million mark, maybe. Where some people might see that as, oh, none of these are $10 million. Good. I agree. You are right about that. I see instead 3 games with very different appeals that appeal to 3 different kinds of players, whether that's from genre or IP, that will bring in different kinds of players on top of, as an extra padding, as an extra icing on the cake, that is Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, and Pokemon, the much bigger, more recognizable IP, all 3 of those games will certainly sell 10 million plus, 15 million plus, maybe, in all 3 of those cases. And so the reality is, if you are picking up 2 games this year, which is probably how most Nintendo fans will engage with this system, you're going to pick up Mario Kart, and you're going to pick 1 other game. You may even get 3, and the second one's going to be Pokemon or Donkey Kong, and then your third one is going to be Pokemon, it's going to be Metroid, Hyrule Warriors, or Kirby. And that is variety. That is variety in genre, variety on IP. And that, to me, is good balance. Because what it means is that these bigger games, the 2 major ones, Pokemon and Mario Kart, They are spread out, I think, in a good gap there. You got Donkey Kong in the middle, which is definitely smaller than those other two. They're not cannibalizing each other. When you look at a holiday season in the past, you might see Nintendo releasing a Pokemon game, a Smash Bros. Game, a Mario game, and a Zelda game all within a 2-month period.
Yeah.
But those games can't all do amazing in one holiday period. I think there's a better idea of balance in Nintendo's mind when you lay out your game's release schedule to make sure that there's actually proper appetite for all of these games. None of these games are really going to be completely eating one another because they appeal to different sides of the fan base.
Yeah, and I think I like your point about appetite, because I think back to 2017 into 2018. Yeah. And I would say that 2017 was so heavily loaded with tentpoles in that there were really 3 that year on Switch. You had obviously Breath of the Wild, and then you had Splatoon 2, and then you had Mario Odyssey.
Yeah. And Mario Kart.
Right, and Mario Kart. Sorry. Yeah. You had all those tentpoles that we then ended up in an environment where 2018 was quite empty until you got all the way to October of that year. Definitely. I think what Nintendo...
Yeah, well, people tend to forget that the first 8 months of 2018 were ostensibly nothing.
you had a selection of ports, you had Labo, and you had Mario Tennis.
Yes.
And I think that what Nintendo is identifying here is that the big system sellers don't need to hit with a frequency more than what they have right now. Yeah. And then in and amongst that, you slot in other games that are not going to sell the system, but are going to make that purchase more enticing, are going to bulk out that calendar.
Yeah, because what Nintendo sees is that consistency is more important than frequency. People can only get so excited for a big game so often. But you have a big game every 4 or 5 months, that's the cadence at which people actually buy new games, not every 2 months.
Yeah, and we're not wanting for a volume of content either. I mean, if you're looking at the rest of this year, we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 retail releases in the Galaxy Double Pack, Pokemon Legends, Hyrule Warriors, Air Riders, and Metroid for the rest of the year. And there's only about 2.5 months left in the year. So it's a
3.5.
3.5. Sorry.
Yeah.
Wait. Yeah. No, you're right.
October, November, December.
That's wow. That's
math and a half.
Bang. And so this is where I think you have to appreciate Nintendo's approach to placing the tent poles. Yeah. And then you have to then say, okay, well, look, I can rest easy as this person that's not making any kickback off of Nintendo Switch 2 hardware unit sales. So I can rest easy knowing that Nintendo's going to make a lot of money. And then say, okay, well, what is in here to play? What is in here to enjoy in and amongst the tent poles? Because me personally, I sometimes find that what's sort of beneath the tent poles can actually be some of Nintendo's most interesting games.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm not going to make the case that Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment or re-releasing Galaxy 1 or 2 is going to alight the imaginations. But I think that the combination of Kirby Air Riders and Prime 4 is a very interesting closer to the year, in that both are sort of very much positioned at you, the listener. Now, again, if you're not interested in those games, that's fine. You don't have to involve yourself in them. But I think Nintendo's making a concerted effort.
I'm not interested in either of those games.
Yeah.
Well, I am. I'm going to play them. But actually, from what I played of both of them, I didn't like it.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is a great point, right? Because Prime 4 is my most anticipated game ever. I'm very curious what's going to happen with Kirby Air Riders. I would say that the stock of that game has lessened in my mind a little bit.
Okay.
But nonetheless, the fact that Nintendo is speaking, I think, so clearly to two sides of the fan base here. The people who want the very top shelf stuff with Mario Kart World and Pokemon, they're speaking to those guys. And then they're speaking to us in the more hardcore, who are going to be really interested in something like Kirby Air Riders or Metroid. And I think then you have this game in Donkey Kong Bonanza that plays to both crowds. It is revitalizing this legacy IP. I think that if you want to talk about how Nintendo's organized the year, I think they're really providing something for everybody.
Yeah. The next point that I want to cover is the concept of cross-gen games impacting people's engagement with or excitement for Nintendo Switch 2, which I think is one of the most confusing points of this time on a personal level.
Sure.
Because I think the community holds two totally diegetic, what's the word, like polar opposite, diametrically opposed viewpoints. Number one, that Nintendo is not really supporting Nintendo Switch right now. Yeah. They have Metroid and Pokemon, and between I guess also the Galaxy games now that we know about that, there was an 8-month gap between the release of Xenoblade, which is already a pretty niche game, and the Galaxy ports. And so Nintendo has had a, frankly, rather weak and slow lineup for Nintendo Switch software in 2025.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I think most people will agree with, and I think is reflective of an interesting reality where Nintendo is putting less legacy software out to cater to the 140 million Switch 1 users than I would have expected going into this year.
I agree.
That's one element that I think most people would agree with. And then the other hand, the people who are complaining so much about Switch 2 say there's way too much cross-gen software. The Switch 2 doesn't have any games of its own because everything is cross-gen. I'm telling you, both of those cannot be true at the same time. It cannot be true that Switch 1 is getting no games this year because it's 4 or 5 over the course of a 12-month period, and that Switch 2 has no games of its own, or not enough games of its own, because so many of them are cross-gen.
I see what you're saying. I don't think that they're as incompatible as you do, but
sure.
I don't agree that that's a problem, really.
Yeah.
Because I would say that it's fair that if you look at the whole calendar, you have to start doing creative accounting. And I understand that this is not accurate, but I think that there is a point at which even Nintendo making a business case is not going to say, oh, well, they got Welcome Tour, so they're set. Nintendo is going to understand to some degree that the big exclusive software on Switch 2 is Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Kirby Air Riders, and Hyrule Warriors, and that's basically it.
No, what?
My
Pokemon and Metroid don't.
I'm talking about strictly exclusive software right now. I'm saying that I think it's fair if you say, I'm on the sidelines, the only things on Switch 2 this year are Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Kirby Air Riders, and Hyrule Warriors. I get that there's Dragon Drive.
Yeah.
I get that there's Welcome Tour. We've both played both those games, but I think it is also fair if you're an observer to say that those games do not factor into the equation very heavily at all.
No, I agree.
But
my
hold on.
point is,
yeah,
I don't think Nintendo views the lineup like that.
Right. But I'm getting to that still.
Yeah.
I think that it's fair as a customer to say that I want, if I'm spending $500 or $450 on this brand new system, I want more than 4 games only to its name that are consequential.
Sure.
I think that's a fair point to have. I also think it's fair to say that the 2025 on Switch 1 is not very good. I think it's fair to say that something like Tomodachi Life should have been out this year. I think it's fair to say that Rhythm Heaven should have been out this year.
Sure.
I think it's fair to say that there should have been another port or something in there too. I think that's all valid. But I agree with you insofar that Nintendo's interest is not in these sorts of delineations.
Yeah, of course.
They've created an ecosystem, and this is being reinforced over and over again, where Switch 1 and Switch 2 are in conversation with each other.
Yeah.
At this point in time, Switch 2 is not a replacement for Switch 1, in my view. These systems coexist. They share some games. They talk to each other through game chat.
Yeah.
They're involved
Game share.
They're involved in the same overarching online subscription service that they both get games to.
Largely the same eShop.
Like, these are systems that right now exist in tandem.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair for you to say as a customer, hey, look, there's not that much for me right now. Okay, Nintendo's going to get you in 2027, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they'll get you in
26
or 27 when there's like a revision to the hardware. There's something cheaper you can jump into. Whatever. Sure. But right now, in Nintendo's mind, they have a bountiful selection of software for whichever Nintendo system you're on. And I think that anything beyond that is in their mind irrelevant. And I think to you as a player should also be irrelevant. If either you're excited for Metroid Prime 4 or you're not. If you're not, cool. If you are, it being cross-gen is not particularly relevant, I don't think.
Well, I'm just confused on who it being cross-gen is so strongly relevant to that it is an explicit issue for Nintendo's 2025. In that, if you are a Pokemon fan of any kind, you can play the new Pokemon game.
Yeah.
If you're a Metroid Prime fan, whether that is someone who is a legacy fan who may only have picked up a Switch at a cheaper price, or someone who's hardcore and has got your Switch 2 day one, or will pick one up this holiday season, you can play Metroid Prime. And so, in addition, that is also on top of those other 4 or 5, and if you expand it out to these games that less people care about, wider variety of software that is then available for you to purchase in the year of our, and not even in the year of our Lord 2025, in the last 6 months of the year of our Lord 2025.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just think that I am maybe more sympathetic to the feeling of buyer's remorse or whatever, of, I've bought this system and all the stuff is still coming to Switch 1. But I would also make the argument that case was clear to you before you bought the system.
No, well, of course, yeah.
And I totally understand that if you look at Nintendo with a broader lens, this sort of cross-generational support is not precedented, and the expectation set by the company is that you buy the new system and there's going to be a plentiful selection of games you can only play on it. But I think that you have to meet Nintendo where they are right now, and where they are is, even before release, in an environment where they're clearly telegraphing to you that these two systems are going to exist side by side for a while still. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that their handling of that strategy, again, a lack of Switch 1 software has not been great, but that is the intent. And again, it's not your concern to try and try to assess whether ZA being on both systems is going to not sell Switch 2 hardware. What I want to know is, for you as a player, why is it less interesting to you to play ZA on your Switch 2 knowing that somebody's playing it on their Switch 1?
Yeah. And frankly, I'm just not sympathetic to the cross-gen being a bad thing argument, because the game should be good.
Yeah.
And the games, from what we've played, are either fine or great. You know, the games are not out yet, but also if you look back, there are, I think, very, very, very few games that have truly been hampered by cross-generation support. I think for the most part, cross-gen games have only been enhanced by the fact that they are then brought forward and made continually relevant to the future on next-gen hardware.
Well, I mean, what it depends on is to what extent is that older version hampering the ambition or the scope of the game intrinsically. And I would say that right now there's not an argument for that happening. Because if you look at, because there is a point of discussion, I think has faded a little bit, but some irritation that we got confirmation that both Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza started on Switch 1.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that's completely irrelevant, because in the text of those interview conversations where we learn that material, Nintendo's groups in EPD9, who makes Mario Kart, EPD8, who makes Donkey Kong Bonanza, said, hey, we could make the game we wanted to make on Switch 1, so we scrapped that version and we made it a Switch 2 game. Mm-hmm. Then you look at something like Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and there's a part of me that watches the most recent trailer and says, man, this open world looks so barren. I wish this game was only ever built for Switch 2. Mm-hmm. But then you have to remember that this is a game that has always been built for Switch 1. Yes, it just so happened is getting some bells and whistles for Switch 2. And those bells and whistles are cool, and I don't really see an issue with that. You know, if we come into holiday 2026 and Nintendo says, here's Super Mario Galaxy 3, as the community's been talking about, and that game cross-releases on both systems, and you can feel as though the ambition of the game has been scaled back for the hardware, that's a different conversation than what's happening right now. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. And it's interesting then to bring that to the wider pool of Nintendo's development team. Yeah. Because I think this is the real point that we wanted to hit home on. Yeah. Before we move into the wider slate that Nintendo now has going into 2026, which is where the true meat and potatoes of this, especially post this direct, lie. But the real confusion that I especially want to apply to the games we've talked about and the games we will talk about is that people, I think, see a gap of time and expect that it's going to be used for one particular thing.
That's a great point.
Is that it's been 7 years, or well, it's been even more since Super Mario Odyssey. It's been whatever amount of years since Mario Kart 8. It's been whatever amount of years since insert any franchise. There must be I think people's assumption is there must be a game in this series coming soon, because within this franchise, this has been the gap. When the reality is you have to have a little bit more information on what the effort is that goes in from these teams that made those games to how long it takes to make a game, in the current time period, which is longer than it was before, and also what variety of projects these teams are working on and have worked on that impact the development timelines of any given series. The reality is that when the Mario Kart team makes Mario Kart 8 in 2014, and then they make Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and ARMS in 2017, after that, people are like, well, it's got to be 4 years or whatever until the next game, because it has been X amount of years since the most recent release. But they were working on Mario Kart Tour in there. They were working on Mario Kart Home Circuit in there. They were working on the Booster Course Pass in there. And they were working on Mario Kart World in there. And so all of those things add up to the fact that that is why that game took as long to make as it did. It is not simply, it's been this long, therefore a game must come. It is, who are the people making the games? What are they working on? And what is reasonable to expect for them to release in terms of release cadence? And that is where I think most of the disappointment comes from with Nintendo's current release slate. I do think there are a couple of games that I want to get to that I think are possible and reasonable to expect within the next calendar year or something like that, that we didn't see. I think that's totally fair. But for the most part, not the games that people are saying needed to be there.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that... Well, I don't know. Let's think about 3D Mario, because I think that coming out of the Direct, probably the biggest point of irritation has been involving 3D Mario.
I agree,
and I think that there is a real disappointment in that for me, in part because I think that Donkey Kong Bonanza has been taken by the community and sort of cast aside, and all attention has been on where is 3D Mario.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, 3D Mario and Donkey Kong Bonanza both come from within EPD8. And if you watch the GOAT Nintendo Forecast, you would know that there is a good case that there is a 3D Mario game that isn't massively far away.
Yeah.
But I think you have to appreciate the fact that right now, the game EPD8 has put a lot of its resources into and its focus onto is Donkey Kong Bonanza. And that game is novel and different, and I think that's part of what makes it so cool, but that is a game that is supposed to be right now satisfying that 3D Mario hunger. And alongside that, you're going to get Galaxy 1 and 2 later this year, which are probably being worked on by Nerd and being worked on by EPD8 as well. It doesn't mean that 3D...
I'm not working on it.
Huh?
I'm not working on it.
It doesn't mean you're not going to get 3D Mario as well, but I think as a player, you need to recognize the fact that there's no world where you're not going to get a 3D Mario on Switch 2.
Yeah.
And that you have to say, okay, well, we know that they're working on this, they're cooking on it. It could be as soon as holiday next year, it could be 2027, but in the medium term, what we have is Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is a very rich and interesting game that deserves more of our time and attention and analysis than the couple weeks post-release before we got to opining where 3D Mario is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's interesting that, and I think especially because of what we've talked about for years, that Nintendo is surprisingly covert in the ways that they, especially for their internally developed games, allow the wider Nintendo audience to familiarize themselves with who are actually making their games. I think something that we maybe underestimate is how having the teams be named EPD, which most people don't know what that means, and then insert a number, is poor naming for people understanding that there are these internally disparate teams that work on what set of projects they work on. I think most people expect, and I think this is largely reasonable, most people expect that there's a 3D Mario team that makes 3D Mario games. That is largely true. However, what we're currently experiencing is a break. For the first time in a long time, a break from that, where the 3D Mario team that made Odyssey has a massive overlap with Donkey Kong Bonanza. It is a different IP. It is not a 3D Mario game. But because it's not 3D Mario, I think there's a lot of expectation in other people's mind that must be a different team. And there is some analysis to say that it is probably in part. a different
within the same larger group of UPD8.
Yes, but it doesn't count towards the development time of the next 3D Mario because it's not 3D Mario on an IP name, but on a development structure name. It is the next project that team put their full force ass into. On top of the fact that you have to remember, they did work on 3D All-Stars, and they did work on Bowser's Fury, and they did work on re-releasing 3D World, of course. So there is this run of projects that are definitely smaller. But effort is divided, and so that means that a 3D Mario is just simply not reasonable to expect. Frankly, I think even to show up here, I'm even on the team that I'm not confident that we'll even see it next year, because Donkey Kong Bonanza is just as wide and deep of a game as Super Mario Odyssey was.
I was thinking about this last night. I wonder if instead of Donkey Kong, if the game did just star Mario and he got I don't know, he ate a mega mushroom and he couldn't get smaller, so he has the strength that he can destroy shit.
Yeah.
If the conversation would just be massively different because it's the IP people want.
I think that's true.
and I think that that's just sort of unfortunate. And I really like your point about taking the time to understand not time in terms of IP, but time in terms of development work.
Correct. Yes.
And I would also, again, I want to hammer this point home that you are getting a 3D Mario game.
Yeah.
I think that you have to, at a certain point, exercise patience.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you don't have a wide enough taste in Nintendo games to where even something like Donkey Kong Bonanza is interesting to you, go live your life. But then you have to temper your frustration with the reality of what that team has been involved in. And even if, let's just say that there is a 3D Mario game basically ready or in the polishing stages, there's a good case that Nintendo said, we're going to give Donkey Kong Bonanza time. We're going to give it a holiday season. We're going to give it a big push. And then we're going to maybe give it after it's had its moment in the sun in 2025, we'll come out in 2026 with 3D Mario.
Mm-hmm.
Announce it in June, release it in November. I don't know.
I think that's very possible. Yeah.
I'm just making the case that even if a game is ready, it doesn't mean they're going to release it. That's another key understanding about Nintendo you have to have.
Well, that's an understanding I think most people don't have, because it's hard to know that from the outside, is that there is this lineage of completing a project and waiting to deploy it for the right moment, optically and scheduling wise, rather than it's ready, press go.
Right, exactly. And so I think that that's just something that really has to be taken into account as it relates to Mario in specific. Yeah. You also have to think about, and this is sort of something I've been mulling on, this idea of Switch 2. Again, bearing in mind that Nintendo treats it as a system that exists in conversation with Switch 1 as almost another year of the wider Switch generation. Mm-hmm. The reason I make this point is because some other things that people want, and I'm going to say here a good example being another Zelda announcement from EPD3, is unlikely because just 2 years ago, EPD3 released Tears of the Kingdom. They're the Zelda team.
Their biggest game ever.
The biggest game ever. And now there's no doubt that because the game was delayed for polishing, they were probably in pre-production the next Zelda game. But think about the scale of their game making. And then this is a good point to pivot into as it relates to 2026. Think about their movie schedule. Yeah. I think that there's a very strong case that EPD3's next project will arrive around the movie. Whether that means a little bit before the movie, whether that means a holiday season after the movie, like Wonder. Mm-hmm. You have to consider Nintendo now from new dimensions. You have to consider how their development teams are not only busy, what they've done recently, but now what their games are going to be put in relation to, specifically movies.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's something that people have a hard time reconciling with because it is so new. And I frankly think Nintendo is just taking these steps to really understand harmony between their projects. I think because development timeline of a game, development production of a movie, they're different things, but when they are handled under one larger creative branch, there can be this synergy that actually I think the wider video game industry is only starting to come to grips with. And I do think that even if I'm not going to play it, and I think it's got a couple of issues, I think that the Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 combo pack being made available before the movie, which means that on store shelves and on the eShop and in the theaters, you can have this Mario Galaxy. Go play it now. It's available on the eShop. Go buy it in the store. As the trailer is going to start to be shown probably in just like a month or two consistently, this is marketing synergy in a way that we haven't experienced before. And Nintendo, I think, views something like even those Mario Galaxy ports, which I think people are very underplaying in terms of the potential impact, potential sales potential that they are going to have, as something they want to put serious marketing into because it synergizes with the movie. The main point of the anniversary section, frankly, yesterday in the Direct was not the announcement of the next mainline Mario game. Obviously, that wasn't there. But that the next film, releasing in just a couple months, called the Super Mario Galaxy movie, is going to be a $1.5 billion movie. It is the core of Mario's celebration 40th anniversary, something that we've really never had before. The idea of celebrating the anniversary of an IP, not with a game of which the IP originated with, but with a project, this film, that is going to be something that is actually even bigger than the game even maybe could be.
I think that's a really key point. I mean, this actually invokes an article that we read that was published today by Giovanni Colantonio, who is an outstanding writer currently for Polygon, who made this this case for the this creative case for Nintendo's 2025, and then made a really shrewd point at the end of his piece where he talks about the Super Mario Galaxy movie as a tentpole for Nintendo. And, and he said, and I had responded to his article saying how great I thought it was. And he made this really key point, I think, where he says, the movie is basically being positioned the same way as Nintendo would a 3D Mario game. Same kind of tentpole release energy. I wonder if we see movies standing in those traditional big game slots more often.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we just have to really bear in mind as a player base moving forward. Yeah. Now, I've got two things to say about this. Mm-hmm. One is that I think Nintendo has been telling us this for a couple months now. Because if you go back to the Asset Developer column for Donkey Kong Bonanza, and again, I recognize that most people aren't going to read this stuff, but in there, they explicitly say that the new design for Donkey Kong in Donkey Kong Bonanza is the design that was then given over to Universal in Illumination for the movie. And for Mario Kart and everything. So there is this creative give and take between the games and the movies. Right now, it seems like it only flows in one direction, and that's not that surprising to me that Nintendo EPD would steer the ship. But there's little doubt in my mind, and it's sort of becoming increasingly... I'm getting to the point where I'd be increasingly surprised if EPD8's next project wasn't Galaxy 3, actually. But there's this synergy that is being developed there, and even in the Direct yesterday, not only did Mr. Miyamoto say that the big thing of next year's Mario anniversary is the movie, but he said that he is working daily on the movie, overseeing the movie. Nintendo's veteran game talent is now involving itself in these other avenues. Ayanuma is no doubt going to be very heavily involved in the Zelda movie.
Of course.
And there's no doubt that there's going to be a relationship between that next Zelda game, presumably in 2027, and the movie. So I think we have to broaden our understanding. Sure. But as a player, I will say, I'm not so sure how I feel about this.
Sure. Yeah.
Just in the sense that I would be a little bit bummed out if Nintendo is so interested in becoming a transmedia Disney-like company that sometimes instead of getting my big Nintendo game in a slot, we get a movie. But again, this is where you have to slice. You have to make a hard division between your perspective and Nintendo's perspective, because the conflation happening right now is, I think, the heart of all the issues.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting that we'll have to see how the full year plays out next year, because I would, and this upcoming movie is a very different case than the one we got even just a couple years ago. But the fact that 2023 had both the Mario movie and Mario Wonder, among actually many other Mario projects in that time period, to me says that I don't think Nintendo is replacing.
It's a good point.
But instead creating another tentpole. Like, it might be... I think even if a 3D Mario is released next year, the movie would still be the bigger tentpole. And so him saying that, even if Galaxy 3 comes out in the holiday of next year, I don't think Miyamoto's wrong to say that the big tentpole for the 40th anniversary is still that movie. Well, I think that if Galaxy 3 was releasing at any point next year, or if a 3D Mario was releasing at any point next year, I think it would have been in this presentation. But I also think that doesn't necessarily mean. Well, I know that it means that that game's not coming, or that the next 3D Mario game is not coming.
Yeah, I mean, it also just goes back to your point, because I almost read it in a slightly different way, and this also goes back to something else Giovanni wrote in his piece, where he makes the argument that maybe the big system seller Nintendo is thinking about right now is the Galaxy movie. Part of me wonders that even if they have a big holiday Mario game next year that they're going to announce in June, that in their view, as you were mentioning before, a $1.5 billion film is still the centerpiece.
I think it is.
Yeah, or even just the other thing is that it might not be as deep as that. It might simply be, rhetorically speaking, a massive movie like that for them is the biggest thing that they're going to have next year, and the Nintendo community should try to understand that.
Yeah, because it's a different era of Nintendo. We haven't had to wrestle with this before, and to the point that I think you started this whole movie conversation with, is that's also true with Zelda. We have a release date for the Sony Pictures live action Zelda movie of May 7th, 2027. That is not next year. And so, a Zelda game, especially a mainline one, is not going to release next year. It's going to come out alongside the movie. I think not only does that make sense from a marketing and synergy angle, which again, something that people aren't used to, so it makes sense that has to sort of set in to their expectations of what the lineup or cadence is going to be. But another thing that I think is just really frustrating is that I still think that a lot of hardcore Nintendo fans are operating under this understanding of game development timelines that is outdated at this point in time. I think a lot of people say that games should be getting, or series should be getting entries every 3 or 4 years, which is how it worked in the 2000s, the 90s, the 2000s, and even into the early 2010s, but is not the case anymore. I think people have had a hard time adapting to that, and to the point where you want that next Zelda to come soon, because that's kind of how it was working, but that's not how it is working. And I think people have to recalibrate themselves a little bit because of that.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Furukawa also recently said that they're looking to pull their development times back shorter.
Sure.
So I think we're going to start to see the fruits of the labor of that soon.
Maybe.
In the next couple of years. But I think it's also important to note, again, IP versus development, right? Because you can have Zelda content basically every year, because they basically do. But it's not all coming from EPD3. Last year they assisted, but Grezzo took the lead. Co-lead with somebody from EPD3 to get Echoes of Wisdom out. This year, just even for the sake of argument, totally put the two 4K Switch 2 editions of the open air games to the side. We're getting Hyrule Warriors from AAA game studios inside of Koei Tecmo. So they're going to keep providing you with Zelda content, but if you're after the main big next game after Tears of the Kingdom, you're going to be waiting a little bit of time.
Yes. But
let's sort of close this out by looking at the state of play for 2026.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's also being given a really short shrift unfairly. What do you make of the currently 10 games Nintendo has announced for 2026?
I think that people fail to remember what it's usually like going into a next year with Nintendo. The reality is that Nintendo's biggest announcements, especially in the last couple years, have come partway through a year for release later that year.
Yeah.
This year is very different. This year, we've been getting 2026 games announced as early as March 2025 for, is still to this day ambiguously 2026.
Yeah.
We had multiple games announced in March, we had multiple games announced in April, and we had multiple games announced in September. And so we have now set up a runway. We've set up a slate for the next 8-9 months that is more full looking forward in terms of release cadence, variety of IP, and number of titles, just on a sheer number of titles basis, more full than I think any year than we've ever had going forward. And I think that's especially why I find it so confusing and frankly a little bit frustrating that people are still wanting more are wanting different. When these projects, the games that people want, another Smash Brothers, another 3D Mario, a 3D Zelda, or mainline Zelda, not only, as we've explored, could not be produced in the amount of time to release the cadence that people want them to be, but also have essentially no bearing on these other games that are coming from teams that are not those big teams. The only caveat being Splatoon Raiders, which is coming from EPD5, the team that makes Splatoon, mainline Splatoon games and mainline Animal Crossing games, those of both of which I think people would see as a major deal system seller. But for the most part, this is other teams putting out their projects when they are ready to. And some of them, like Game Freak and like Camelot and even Intelligent Systems, taking a little bit longer to recalibrate and find stronger projects than they even were in the Switch generation. Some people might forget, but a lot of the games that Nintendo actually put out in the Switch generation, even though I think it was a phenomenal generation on the whole, there were these moments when games were pushed out clearly too early. And that seems to ideally not be the case anymore. Which is a better thing. But you have to give the games more time to be made if you want them to be better when they release. And so I just think from many, many angles, I am really flabbergasted and kind of overwhelmed by the amount of games that they have announced. It's really impressive, especially coming out of 2024. That was not only slow on the whole, but especially in that first half of the year, the lack of information was really frustrating for the community. I think reasonably so. I felt it the same way. But even by the end of the year, there's a couple games, but that year was, and then this first chunk of this year, also very slow information wise. And now we've completely turned the faucet on, and not only on, like we've ripped off the handle and it won't stop flowing.
I mean, I just look at this lineup and I'm similarly just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it, because we're talking about a variety of IP and a variety of style of game to where I just am so surprised that anybody could look at this and not find something they're interested in. Yeah. Let's just say you want Animal Crossing. I really want Animal Crossing too. I assume that it's coming soon. Yeah. But I feel like, you're going to find something similar to love in either Tomodachi Life or Pokemon Pokopia.
Yeah, I agree.
I want to make a point here that I've been stewing on that I just looked up to confirm.
Okay.
Mario Tennis Aces as of end of 2022 sold 4.
Is that the most recent? That's the most recent update.
Yes, sold 4.5 million units.
Sure.
Street Fighter 6 as of June of this year has sold 5 million units.
Sure.
I think to many people, they look at Street Fighter 6 in 2023 as this massive tentpole, humongous release from Capcom.
Yeah, of course.
And it is because 5 million units is a ton of copies.
Yeah.
But do you want to know how many games in this lineup from Nintendo for 2026 based on past experience are going to sell that?
Like all of them?
A lot
except
of them.
for Rhythm Heaven?
Mario Tennis Fever. Again, point of comparison, 4.5 million units there on Switch 1.
Yeah.
Tomodachi Life on 3DS.
Definitely.
3DS sales. Let's see here.
Splatoon Raiders will definitely sell 5 million, if obviously not more.
6 million copies of Tomodachi Life on 3DS.
Yes.
And that game's sort of star has only risen considerably through TikTok and everything in the years since. Mm-hmm. That game, Mario Tennis, Splatoon Raiders, most likely Pokemon Pokopia, Fire Emblem, if it sells like 3 houses, you're looking at games that are going to sell floor 3, 4, 5 or more million units. And that is the majority of where Nintendo's games sit. You get a crop of 15 or 20 games that are going to sell tens of millions of units in a system's life. But the Switch 1 has, I believe, I was seeing here for this article from The Gamer, 72 games that have sold over 1 million units as of the start of this year. So the overwhelming majority of Nintendo's games sell like these games. And these games sell with a consistency that most other publishers in the gaming industry would kill for.
Yeah, absolutely.
These are small games only to the person who thinks that Nintendo should only be releasing these S-tier franchises.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's what is, again, kind of clouding people's judgment for this, is that the Tomodachi Life and Yoshi and Pokopia and Fire Emblem and Rhythm Heaven, the development of those games, the release of those games has no bearing on when a Smash Brothers or a 3D Mario or a 3D Zelda or a Splatoon are going to come out.
Yeah.
Or an Animal Crossing or Luigi's Mansion. These are different games that Nintendo is positioning in their own slots for their own reasons to appeal to their own fan bases, and it's not one or the other. In terms of a direct, it might be, it's like, okay, we can't have every game announced in a showcase. But what it means is that those other games aren't ready yet. I think we've talked about a couple of them. But I also think that one thing is people, I think, are underappreciating the potential sales of 3 of these games, being Pokemon Champions, Pokemon Pokopia, and the Duskbloods.
Yes.
I think all 3 of those games have the potential, the Pokemon ones especially, to be 10 plus million sellers, and Duskbloods being a very interesting quantity in terms of the position FromSoft serves right now, and also it being a multiplayer game. There's a lot of question mark on it, but you have to understand that the position that FromSoft is in right now gives that weight. Like, Duskbloods could potentially be like one of the best-selling games that Nintendo has exclusive to their system next year.
Certainly. And I just think that when you start to piece this up, as you're saying, you're going to have these massive games that hold cachet with the hardcore players like Duskbloods and Fire Emblem, different types of hardcore players there.
Yeah.
Splatoon Raiders as well. For the casual audience, and the casual audience is mostly who Nintendo is trying to attract in with system sellers, Tomodachi Life, maybe that's going to sell mostly on Switch 1, but a massively successful software sale result is still very huge for Nintendo. That's still a lot of profit for them to reinvest into new games.
Yeah.
And then you have these really great niche titles in here, like Rhythm Heaven Groove, that I'm very much excited about. So I just don't think that you can make the argument that on anything other than an IP basis, Nintendo is missing something huge. I just think that you already have a very well-balanced year there.
Yeah. But I think the last point that I want to make is a moment of personal disappointment for me with the Nintendo community. Because I think the frustration for the lineup and the disappointment with yesterday's Direct, to me, makes it more clear than ever that even in the hardcore online Nintendo conversation circles that you and I operate in, that you and I and our close group of friends are interested in a wider variety of Nintendo games than most people. I've always known that to be the case. Yeah. But the reality was smashed in my face yesterday when I see a lineup of 15 games that Nintendo has releasing over the course of the next 8 or 9 months, which is a more complete and full lineup of video games than you'll almost ever get. Yeah. Even from Nintendo. You know, it seems as if we're not going to get almost even a month without a game releasing. Which was still true during the Switch generation. That happened on occasion. But that I've always known it to be the case, but it's like now I really realize a lot of people just play Mario and Zelda. A lot of people just care about Mario, Zelda, Smash Bros, and Pokemon.
But they only care about them through a specific lens. They don't care about a Mario Tennis or a Yoshi. Yeah. They care about
or 2 Pokemon spinoffs that could probably sell over 10 million copies.
Yeah, or Hyrule Warriors. And again, I think it's hard, right? Because to piggyback on your point, my point of frustration is that so many people even involve themselves in this conversation, opposed to your conversation, which I think is more honest. I think it's more honest if you say, hey, look, I want Mario. Where's my next big Mario game? Yeah. Then I think we can have a more interesting conversation and say, oh, well, here's where I think the Mario game is. In the meantime, I think you would really enjoy checking out Game A and Game B. Mm-hmm. It's not your responsibility to sell the hardware for Nintendo, and I think as
yeah, it's interesting.
As we've been, I think, hopefully elucidating in this conversation, Nintendo has set themselves up in a way that they are going to sell the hardware. Yeah, your appraisal, I hate to say it, not you, Tucker Hazel, but you, audience member, is flat out wrong. It's just wrong. It's just not true that Nintendo is in some dire position. I don't care what people are saying about game key cards. I don't care what people are saying about Mario Kart. I don't care about any of this stuff. If you are using that to make an objective case for Nintendo having no momentum or having no software that's going to be successful, you're just wrong. Yeah. So
and to that point, I think another thing that has been so frustrating since the Switch 2 released is people saying Nintendo is not communicating. When the point that we have made on multiple occasions is that is, just because you don't care about the information doesn't mean they're not telling you information. The amount of presentations and game specific directs and trailers that have been dropped in Nintendo Today news and their third party showcases in the indie worlds, and now this major direct has been very, very, very consistent. And especially now that they announced 4 more games and are starting the marketing of their next major movie, there is, I mean, we haven't seen it yet, but there is very little. There's my hopes are incredibly high, and my expectations are incredibly low. That they have to communicate about all of this because there is simply just too much of it to go silent.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't want it to make it sound like what we're saying is that you're wrong for feeling disappointed, but I think you're wrong for using your disappointment as a way to paint an inaccurate picture of the company. What I would love to get to is a point where the community can refocus and talk about exactly what's happening. To your point, I really like your point of it's not Nintendo isn't communicating, it's that you don't want to hear what they have to say.
Same with games.
Let's have that conversation. How about Tucker and I can sit down and we can share with our experience from Nintendo's games in the past why we're really excited or not excited for a Metroid or a Kirby or a Tomodachi Life, and try to help you as a viewer, as somebody who's like grasping for something to play, understand that there actually is stuff here that you would like, and not just because it's niche or because it's cool to like these niche Nintendo things, but because there's a real value to them, a creative value to them that you could relate to. But the conversation is not moving deeper than, where is 3D Mario? What's the deal with the price on this thing? How come Nintendo didn't give the release date for Metroid and Hyrule Warriors sooner? It's not good discussion. Yeah. In my view, it's as simple as that.
Yeah. Is there anything else discussion-wise that we want to cover?
I think we've been pretty robust. I think we've done a good job retorting the case that Nintendo is in a bad position. And I hope that now, with us out of our systems, people can go check out our other discussion about the Direct, where we talk about on a more subjective level why we're quite excited for these games. So.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Oh, stealing the bye-bye.